Yeah, so welcome everyone to this endorsement event and conversation. My name is Lorna. I am the campaign manager for Winfield for US Senate. I'm really excited for this conversation today. There's two really smart Athenians talking about some very interesting issues. And I just want to give a brief introduction of them. And I am excited that we're now able to all be together. So first, we have Mariah Parker. She has a master's in linguistics from the University of Georgia and is a PhD student there in the language and literacy education department. She's also an internationally traveled hip hop performance artist going by the name Lingua Franca. Mariah ran for the commissioner's seat on the platform of economic justice, fair wages, fair jobs, affordable housing, youth development, criminal justice, and marijuana legalization. She also made headlines when she took her oath as commissioner with one hand on the autobiography of Malcolm X, held by her mother, and one in the air, clenching her fist. Richard Dien Winfield is running for the United States Senate on a platform of social rights anchored on a federal job guarantee capped by legal care for all, which is the topic of conversation today, which together will lay the foundation for ending the systemic racial and gender discrimination, as well as wealth and income disparity that people of color face in this country to this day. He's also a professor of philosophy at the University of Georgia and a proud union member. So this afternoon, we really want to follow Mariah's endorsement of Richard with a conversation about legal care for all, which is a very unique platform or pillar of Richard's platform. No one else in the entire country is running on an issue like this. So I'll be directing the conversation with a few questions, but feel emboldened to submit questions as the conversation goes along. And time permitting, I can raise them. So without any more further ado, I'll turn this over to you, Mariah, for a few comments.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Lorna. Thank you so much for having me, Richard, and thank you all for joining us. I am so excited to endorse Richard for U.S. Senate. I think that he has the moral courage as well as the bold transformative platform that Georgia desperately needs in the Senate to tackle issues of mass incarceration, of disparities in our criminal justice system, as well as empower workers and ensure that we have a climate-centered economy that gives a sustainable future to all Georgians and all Americans. And so I'm very, very excited to stand with him in this fight, to bring his bold visionary leadership to the Senate next year, and to have him fighting for us, for all Georgians, as our senator. So thank you for the work that you've done so far, Richard. Thank you for coming out this summer as the uprising sort of had its manifestations here in Athens. You were part of the caravans that I led, and always showing up for racial and economic justice for Georgia.
Well, thank you for your endorsement, and I have to thank you for all of the activism that you've courageously engaged in. I remember 2 years ago when we were both running in our respective races. I was running for the U.S. House and you were running for your current seat. And I remember on the very last hours of election day, we both happened to meet outside a school on the edge of Athens under torrential rain. My wife and I were sort of huddled up in our car waiting for it to abate, but you were out there on the road.
That's right. Yeah, drenched head to
like
toe.
a worst monsoon, and you were just, in your usual all-out courageous energy, and as you know, it helped you. You got a few more votes and made it in.
Yeah.
And I just have to say this, we're all in this together in the sense of being people who are trying to win office, to do the right thing, and it has to be done at all levels. It has to be done at the local level, at the statewide level, at the national level. And we really have to support one another. And well, I really thank you for giving me your support and giving me
Absolutely.
an added.
I can't wait to have you as my senator.
Yeah, okay. Giving me the pariah bump, as Stephen Colbert used to speak of the Colbert bump once upon a time. But
great.
I don't know. Shall we leap into the question before us?
Yeah, I think so. So I think first, maybe directed at you, Mariah, what do you see as the biggest problem are the series of biggest problems with the criminal justice or just even justice system in Athens. Problems that you face as a commissioner, problems that you know about throughout the state in terms of criminal justice, and how does that work and impact our communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, it's hard to identify a single problem in our criminal justice system that alone will, if fixed, will fix its entire issue. Really, you have to look at it as a term in terms of an array of cascading interaction points throughout the system at which poor folks and people of color face discrimination. We have to address over-policing in our communities, the fact that the police have discretion on how many resources they put into investigation and whether or not to arrest the subject, which are racially biased affairs, and impossible to root out given the racist history of the institution of policing, and instead requiring investment in community programs that address the root causes of crime and specialized and or community-based alternatives to policing that strengthen the social fabric of our neighborhoods and help support community well-being. We have to consider the fact that at this initial interception point, of entry into the criminal justice system, we are seeing a lot of over-policing in communities like mine in District 2, where African Americans are 5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than their white counterparts, even though both races are equally likely to use the drugs. So marijuana prohibition and the lingering vestiges of the war on drugs are a big issue. And then within the criminal legal system itself, prosecutors have discretion on whether to bring charges, and if so, how serious the charges are. Prosecutors and defense lawyers negotiate on plea bargains, and we have judges and juries using their discretion on whether to convict or hand down sentencing. And at this point in the system, we're dealing with a lot of overworked and underfunded public defenders. I was really very proud this year that we approved some equity raises for the public defender's office, as well as hiring a second social worker to help defendants access the resources they need to faithfully enact their defense plans and avoid future interaction with the legal system. But it doesn't stop there. These folks are fighting within a racist system, so getting progressive prosecutors and judges to run and win office is a critical step in criminal legal reform as well. To address what has been revealed by the Georgia Institute for Transitional Justice and scholars like Shara Sandin at the University of Georgia, are very real disparities in sentencing. Hispanic folks are a lot less likely to be arrested, but they're more likely to be prosecuted and sentenced harshly. Black men, on the other hand, though they make up 13% of the Athens population, make up 45% of those sentenced to confinement in state court and 60% of those sentenced to confinement in superior court. Even when controlling for charges faced and defendants' criminal histories, Black males were also found to serve longer sentences than white females or Black females. So even when their histories and the charges are the same, if you can even narrow the data down to individual judges that are sentencing Black males to longer confinement than their white counterparts. And so these are issues we have to deal with in the judiciary by electing folks like Deborah Gonzalez and actually running folks against the judges that are currently upholding the racist system of our criminal legal system. Another big issue for me is unpaid inmate labor. Folks are saddled with criminal legal debt associated with unpaid fines, with their legal representation, with court costs, and then when they're in our county jail, coerced into working for the city without pay. When they leave, they face steep challenges in finding work and paying off their debts, making it more likely that they'll return to crime as a means of making ends meet. So ending the system of unpaid inmate labor is really important to me as a part of the criminal justice reforms needed for Georgia. Georgia is one of, I think, 4 or 5 states in the country that currently don't pay inmates anything for their labor, in addition to having the second highest incarceration rate in the country. But I think Legal Care for All addresses a lot of these issues at several decision points. It guarantees access to quality legal care for all persons, bring down the number of plea deals folks enter into out of a lack of good legal representation, hopefully bringing down our incarceration rates, and then freeing up more money to put into preventative services that help intercept would-be offenders before they interact with police in the first place. As well, it ensures those sentenced and incarcerated have a better chance of success post-relief by relieving their legal debts. So at a number of points in this system where folks are currently facing discrimination, currently being set up for a cycle of recidivism and poverty. It addresses a lot of these issues. So I'm really excited to talk to Richard today about legal care for all and his vision for how this will help fix some of the issues with our criminal legal system.
Well, thanks for laying out really so many of the grave injustices of our criminal justice system. I think the huge importance of the judicial system is that we all know that all of our rights are in jeopardy if we can't fight for them in the courts. And from beginning to end in our judicial system, in both our criminal and civil judicial systems, how much money you have faithfully determines how you fare. And that, of course, should not be the case. We should be all equal before the law. We should have genuine equal opportunity in the courts, but we don't have that because of the way money infects every aspect of the judicial system. And because it does, it means that the whole judicial system is like one big, huge toll road where as you get sucked into it, and you're more likely to get sucked into it, the less money you have, you end up having your disadvantage not only perpetuated, but intensified. And since in America, there is a racial wealth and income gap, and of course also a gender wealth and income gap, these things get perpetuated and deepened through the course of our legal system, which ends up in effect making war on poor people, and particularly people of color and women. And one crucial part has to do with legal representation. You know, the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to legal defense in criminal matters. But we all know that the way that is taken care of in the United States is not equitable. Because as Mariah was mentioning, one of the key ways of people who do not have the money to hire a private lawyer are afforded legal representation is through legal aid lawyers. And as we know, legal aid lawyers are paid very little. They have huge caseloads. They don't have the time or the resources to engage in pretrial investigations, to really help their clients. The same thing is true of court-appointed lawyers. They're paid much more than private lawyers. So as a result, despite this constitutional guarantee of a right to representation of criminal cases, if you don't have much money, you get a very second-class representation. Not because the people who are doing it are not committed, are not talented, but they are underfunded and overworked. And the statistics are pretty grim. In 20% of the cases of people who were defended by legal aid attorneys, they never see them until they show up in court. Or on average, they see them in about 1 hour. And that plays a huge role in something Mariah brought up, namely the injustice of plea bargaining, which is really the high road to mass incarceration. Because in the United States as a whole, 95% of people charged with a crime end up getting plea bargains to a guilty plea, which in many cases leads to imprisonment, and if not imprisonment, to probation, which I think we need to discuss later on. And keep in mind, Mariah said, well, we need to lower the amount of plea bargaining. But I really think we need to abolish plea bargaining, which has been done in most countries in Europe who do not allow pleas. What that means is that every case has its facts properly investigated. Think of the cases where we really wanted to know what happened. Think of the assassination of Martin Luther King. It was plea bargained. A guilty plea ended all examination of the facts. The public, the victims, everyone deserves, and the accused, deserve to have their day in court to investigate the facts of the case. Now, in addition to criminal representation, we've got to think of civil representation, because civil representation is just as important. It pertains to any harm you suffer, including the harms that happen when you're a victim of a crime. You have a right to go to court to sue for compensation, and sue in all those cases that involve things involving discrimination, sexual harassment on the job, family matters, matters at work, matters with healthcare providers, matters with veteran benefits, and so forth. You know, crucial aspects of your life. And we have no right to legal representation for civil cases. where so many things are on at stake. And the really tragic statistic I think we all need to digest is that 86% of people who end up going to a civil case have no representation. All we have is like, nonprofits like legal services that try to step up and help people, but they don't have the resources to offer much help to anyone. They have to turn away 2/3 of the people who come from them.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes you hear people refer to the for all is Medicare for all, and people have a decent understanding of a single payer healthcare system, but the single payer legal system is what we're talking about now. And could you talk a little bit about how that would be implemented, like how that is different from public defense? And I think Mariah maybe could also jump in to talk about why civil representation would be very transformative in Athens as well. So I want to maybe open those two things up. Like, what is single payer legal care?
Yeah, I mean, you can make a lot of comparisons with what Medicare for all would be if it's properly implemented, where it applies not just to physical ailments, but to mental care, dental care, long-term care, and it offers the same care to everyone. Everyone gets care of equal quality, and it gives you 100% freedom to go to any practitioner you want. And if it's properly implemented, you have no copays, no deductibles, and no premiums. And moreover, we citizens are in the strongest position as presiding over the single payer system to negotiate with healthcare providers to keep prices in check. We can do the same thing with regard to legal representation, not only in criminal representation, but civil cases as well. Where in other words, we have this government-funded legal insurance program. It covers all personal legal expenses, including both advice, independent of having to go to court, as well as representation in court for both criminal and civil cases. And you have perfect freedom to go to any lawyer you want. Everyone can get their dream team. In other words, there's not going to be a difference between people who are defended by some public sector thing like, legal aid, which has far fewer resources than private lawyers. No, here everyone is covered by the same insurance scheme. You can go to everyone. It's of course better for lawyers. You no longer will have underpaid legal aid lawyers. All lawyers will be making the same kind of fees, and we can negotiate as one to keep them in check. And this means that everyone can stand up and fight for their rights. One of the big things that came up in the Me Too movement was how pervasive sexual harassment is, because people can get away with it with impunity. Why? Well, one big part is they don't have the resources to get legal representation. Of course, they also are worried about getting fired because we don't have a federal job guarantee to ensure that you can get a living elsewhere. And for many people, you lose your health care and other crucial benefits if you get fired. So it's hard to blow the whistle. Of course, it'll be easier if we have legal care for all. And that means also fighting against police brutality and standing up to the police, who can get away with it with impunity because their victims and the families of the victims don't have any resources to go to court and sue them, because we have no guarantee of civil representation. So I think these are the big pluses of what to me is a no-brainer. I can't understand why other candidates are not making this a rallying point, given also that now people are beginning to see the light about Medicare for all.
Absolutely. And yeah, I don't mean to have put so many questions up at the jump, but Mariah, how do you think that this system would be transformative in Athens, and what issues particularly would not only criminal but also civil legal care do for our community?
Yeah, I recently had a case where a woman in my district complained to code enforcement about the state of the property that she was renting. It was not being kept up by the landlord. The landlord subsequently filed an eviction notice on the tenant. And we were told by the city attorney that there wasn't much that we could do for her because they deal with governmental issues. They can't really offer any sort of legal advice to private citizens. And so to think about how transformative it would be for that constituent to actually have the confidence to stand up to their landlord and say, this is unfair. I think about, I live in a working class neighborhood, and there's a lot of folks that work in the service industry who are trying to get organized for better wages. We know wage theft is a very under pursued arena of theft that exists in our society, in terms of a legal action taken against employers that aren't paying their employees fair wages. And so to think about how transformative it would be for them to have that confidence that they could go and pursue getting the payment that they deserve. These, folks who are servers, waitresses, bartenders who live in my neighborhood and who don't have access to civil legal representation right now. I think about, I'm very excited about having Medicare for all when we elect, super Medicare for all when we elect Richard in November. But in that transitional period, thinking about the number of people that are facing medical debt, especially during a pandemic, and having someone at their side to help them fight with insurance companies to get their bills renegotiated, to have someone to stand up with them, to stand up for them in matters of medical debt and things like that. Very, very transformative for the people in my district, many of whom are elderly, who have a lot of medical conditions, who require a lot of care, who may or may not be insured. It'd be very transformative for them. So there's so many avenues for the folks that I represent in my district that legal care for all would be, especially its civil representation component, would be incredibly transformative for their lives, in addition to the ways that legal care for all will help reform our broken criminal legal system.
I wanted to comment about two of the issues you brought up. One has to do with evictions, and one could add foreclosures. I mean, right now, as we all know, we're facing, a tsunami of really homelessness because a third of Americans haven't been able to pay their latest rent payments or mortgage payments. And one thing that has already been contributing to homelessness before the crisis we're now facing is the fact that people can't get lawyers to represent them against landlords or lenders. A stark example of this is in New York City, 90% of the landlords have lawyers. 90% of their tenants do not have lawyers. When they have a lawyer and they face eviction, tenants win their case 90% of the time. When they don't have a lawyer, they end up getting evicted more than half the time. And that's the grim situation. That one of the reasons people are suffering homelessness is because they can't fight for their rights. Of course, they don't have the income they need. The other thing has to do with employee rights. I'm a member of a union, and I think Mariah also, you're a member of the same union.
I am.
WA Organizing Local at UGA, which does have a small legal staff, which can provide us with help if we need to defend our rights at the university. Of course, we don't have many rights since we're state employees, and we're not allowed to strike, and we're not even allowed to engage in collective bargaining. And that, of course, has to be overturned. But more than 90% of Americans are not in a union, and they don't have any lawyers available to them, as the union gives. And my wife began her legal career working as a lawyer for a firm that was defending employees against injustices on the part of their employers. And firms like that are far and few between for the reason that their clients don't have the money to pay for their services. So the only way such law firms can operate is by operating on a contingency basis, meaning they only get any revenues if they win the case and they take a cut of the winnings. But it's hard to win. If we had legal care for all, every employee could go in to any lawyer they want. That lawyer would be paid automatically, and they could fight up and stand for their rights, as could any tenant, any person who has a mortgage. And then, as you mentioned, people who are fighting healthcare charges and things of that sort, which are the biggest source of bankruptcy in this nation.
Right.
And how is this federal policy implemented across the differences in legal systems? on state and national or state and local levels you envision? Like what is going to be the relationship between the national government, the federal government, and, you know, the courthouse in Lowndes County, where there are sometimes different procedures and different laws? Like how is this going to work? How are we going to make sure that attorneys can be moving around, or codes can be more unified?
I mean, it has the exact same advantages that Medicare for All has.
Yeah.
In that it covers the entire nation.
Mm-hmm.
It applies to every single lawyer. Mm-hmm. And you can go to any lawyer you want. It's not like having private insurance where you're restricted to who you can use. I'm thinking of healthcare that we're all familiar with. Under Medicare for All, you go to any health practitioner, any health clinic, and you get services, and they're paid, you know, according to the same insurance reimbursements. So it's all known to all parties, and it's easy to administer, and it could be done immediately. Just as Medicare for All doesn't have to wait 10 years or 5 years or 2 years, it could be done immediately. And one thing that could even create enormous savings is we combine the same insurance administration that is covering medical bills with that which will cover legal bills, right? It's already there. We can take advantage of it. And keep in mind, we just leave in place the practitioners of law, just as Medicare for All leaves in place the people who offer medical services. It doesn't require any further public investment. Everything is already there. And we're ready to go. And we're ready to be part of a new birth of freedom.
I think something that's interesting to me about this policy, and maybe I'm extrapolating too much, but the notion that you won't have to go to New York City or Los Angeles if you're a lawyer to go and make $20 million a year because you want to leave Arkansas. It's like there's going to be a redistributive effect in terms of dream team like care. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to think about. Maybe.
I think it's very interesting because I know, and I'm sure Mariah knows this as well. It's true both in any city. It's also true when you get out of cities, mm-hmm. that there are areas in where you have a complete lack of sufficient numbers of doctors, of clinics, of nurses, and likewise of lawyers, mm-hmm. who can defend your rights. Mm-hmm. And part of it is because people don't have the money under mm-hmm. current circumstances to support those practices. But if we have this legal care for all system, or equally the Medicare for all systems, mm-hmm. practitioners will be receiving payments for services that are on a par with people anywhere. And they'll be able to serve all of our populations, no matter where they are.
Yeah. And more as part of this like broader conversation of getting money out of our legal system. I want to point us to the question of cash bail. And, during the uprisings earlier this summer, many activists faced not only police brutality, but the additional cash bail system. And it felt like I was hearing more and more people talk about the frustrations that they had with this, very archaic and strange policy we have of, paying to get out of jail, or paying not to be held, and how unequally that, affects people. And mutual funds sprung up, across the country to crowdsource money to bail protesters at Black Lives Matter protest out. And the conversation is really like, this is a cruel system, and how do we reform it, or how do we change it? And I know that one of your ideas is just abolishing that practice. And I want to know what that would look like. And maybe Mariah, afterwards, if you want to talk about like the relationship between activism and the way that something like cash bail hinders our ability to practice political activism and engage.
Yeah, I'd love to address that really quick before you pass it over to Richard. I saw throughout the summer, both here in Athens and nationally in places like Chicago and Portland, people having to crowdfund bail money through things like Atlanta Solidarity Fund. And also crowdsource the money for their legal representation, or rely on folks like the National Lawyers Guild in order to get representation for purely exercising their First Amendment rights, but being cracked down upon by local police forces. And so I think that is a really great thing to bring up, because it highlights these intertwining issues of both the punitive nature of cash bail in itself, and the ways that during the uprising folks have had to come together to fill in these gaps that both need to be abolished. Legal money in the legal system, from your entry into it all the way through your court case and your representation. And so in last year, we were able to pass the Freedom Act here in Athens, abolishing cash bail for local offenses, but we need someone to represent us at the federal level in order to make sure that that doesn't hold true for other sorts of offenses that people get locked up for, since the misdemeanors and other sorts of ordinance violations that we have jurisdiction over are very limited. And in fact, I think only 9 people were held in Athens for over 48 hours in the year prior to us abolishing cash bail locally. So it only affected a very, very limited number of folks because of the limited scope of the local government. And that's why we need someone like Richard representing us in the Senate, so that nationwide this becomes common practice and we're no longer hindered by some of the limitations we have at the local level. In addition to that, thinking about the ways that folks might not engage in political activism because they're scared of what the repercussions might be if they are locked up, unfairly by a police force that's seeking to repress dissent. A lot of folks might stay home because they don't have that money. They don't have that that comfort of knowing that if they have to go to court over speaking out against police brutality, they'll get the representation they need to avoid. Some of these folks I've seen are facing years and years in prison for the way that they have spoken out. And so I would be interested to see the way that people might engage in more political activism if they didn't have that fear sort of holding them back streets. So that's another reason why Legal Care for All could be really, really transformative for the way people engage in political movements, in addition to the way they fight back against oppression in their workplaces, against medical debt, against their tenants, or against their landlords, etc.
Legal care for all would make a huge difference, but it's clearly not enough, because it in and of itself does not eliminate cash bail. And cash bail is something we're all so used to in America, but it exists nowhere else in the world except the Philippines, and they have it because they were once our colony. Every other country has repudiated it. Admittedly, people are kept in pretrial detention when some kind of due process has occurred with legal representation to say that if they're not kept in pretrial detention, there's good reason to think they're going to jeopardize public safety, or they're going to destroy evidence, or they're going to tamper with witnesses and the like. If that's the case, they should not be able to buy their way out. They should simply be kept there. Bail, cash bail, is nothing other than, in effect, pretrial punishment of the poor. Because what does it do? It takes people who are still presumed innocent before going to trial and has them rot in jail simply because they don't have the money to pay a cash bail. Now, in the United States, we have already 2.5 million people in prison. That's a quarter of the world's population of prisoners, even though we're less than 1/20th of the world's population. We have 500,000 people in prison, and 60% of them are rotting in prison. Are in jail, are rotting in jail because they could not pay cash bail. One of our recent splosses built this huge new jail. What for? At least 60% of its cells should be empty if we abolish cash bail. And think of what happens when someone is stuck in jail. They haven't yet even been tried. They're innocent. Well, they're going to lose their job, right?
They're going to lose their
house,
then they lose their job, they lose their apartment because they can't pay rent, and they lose their car so they can't get a job because they can't get to a job when they get out.
They can and their family suffers irreparable damage. They may lose custody of their kids, and it may be a death sentence because there are people who get so despondent they kill themselves. as they wait month after month. And of course, it puts pressure on people to engage in accepting a guilty plea because they want to get it all over. And we're talking about something where it costs $120 on average for every night someone spends in jail. We spend $14 billion a year keeping people in jail who don't have the money to buy their way out. The bail industry is run by 10 huge corporations. They have revenues of $14 billion a year. They make $2 billion of profit a year. This is just a way of squeezing poor people and people disproportionately of color and wrecking their lives and their communities. It not only perpetuates their disadvantage, but intensifies it no end. And that's one part of how money and this toll booth of our justice system is wreaking havoc. And we also have to look at all the fees that have proliferated, and they are the basis for the for-profit probation system, in which 4.5 million people are victimized in the United States every year.
Another, way that our criminal justice system is acting as a way for some people to make a lot of money off of the backs of poor people and people of color is the mere existence of the private prison industry, which is another thing that we must tackle if we're going to take the money out of the criminal justice system and also, abolish this injustice. I did not know this, but I found out yesterday that over 15% of Georgia's prison population are held in private prisons throughout the state. And the state of Georgia, yearly pays these companies over $140 million to hold these people. And could you speak a little bit more about how, how the private prison industry needs to be taken down throughout the country, and particularly how that relates to immigration problems here?
I mean, it's really another one of these foul American innovations, which simply do not exist and are looked upon as abhorrent in almost every other country. I mean, the idea of a private prison. I mean, think of its basic business model. Its business model, which requires maximizing profits, requires that you imprison as many people as possible for as long as possible, and give them as little as you can in the way of any kind of facilities, food, care, anything else. And they operate on that business model. And not only do the companies, the large corporations of a $5 billion private correction industry operate, but they also do a lot of lobbying in cahoots with ALEC, which comes up with all of these bills to do the kind of things we're all familiar with, namely have minimum sentences for crimes, have 3 strikes and you're out sentencing, and of course criminalizing things that do not deserve to be criminalized at all, like possession of drugs, not just marijuana, but any drug, right? And allowing, thanks to our war on drugs, to gorge our prisons on vast numbers of people, and especially people from minority communities. And the for-profit prisons, in effect, have turned out not to be more cost-effective than public prisons, but they offer lousy services. There's more violence perpetrated on inmates and on staff than elsewhere. Why? Because they have less staff per prison population. They pay their staff less. They're less qualified. They're less well-trained. Their food stinks. They offer rotten health care. There have been various strikes by some of the healthcare nurses and the like who've worked in these facilities about how miserable and ineffective all of this is. And of course, there's some blatant corruption where these for-profit enterprises have hooked up with judges who they pay under the cover to convict a lot of people and give them high sentences. So it is a disaster all around and really should be abolished. And there's no excuse for it. And by the way, you mentioned immigration. 75% of the detention centers of immigrants are privately run. My wife turned from defending employers to defending immigrants, and I would go with her on several occasions down to this immigration private prison in the back of the Beyond, maybe an hour and a half away from Columbus, where there's no cell phone service. The roads are falling to pieces. Family can hardly get there to see their people. And it's a private prison. And I know when I was campaigning in the 10th district, in a lot of communities, the only burgeoning business was private prisons. And not a safe place to work, not a well-paying place to work either. As Kemp says, Georgia is #1 for business.
I think making a sound. I kind of want now maybe for us to open the discussion up to everyone that's participating or viewing. And I message in the chat to submit any questions, but if anyone wants to raise questions now, feel free to unmute and have at it.
Could I just speak about one other issue that I think
people
are not paying attention to? I'll do it very briefly, and that is for-profit probation services. In Georgia, there are more than 30 companies doing it. There are about 340,000 people who are their so-called clients. Now, these are people who are on probation because they could not pay fees, court fees and fines. And there's been an explosion of court fees and fines to help support the explosion in mass incarceration and all of the activity in the judicial system. And the business model of these for-profit probation services is that we put all the costs on the backs of their victims, who have to pay service fees to be supervised while they're on probation. And then they have to sort of pay their fees in installments. And if they can't do it, they borrow money from these companies and then pay interest on it. And then if they don't pay, they get thrown back into prison. And the probation companies don't pay for that. We pay for that. And it's another way of squeezing the poor, and particularly minorities and people of color, of what little money they have. And why are they there? They're there in the first place because of their deprivation. And this just intensifies it. And this is a big thing. 4.5 million people are in their clutches.
4.5 million people are currently
nationwide
wow.
in these for-profit probation services.
Wow.
We should get rid of all the fines, all of the fees. I mean, they're ridiculous. I mean, you may know, Mariah, about the fees that our jail charges people. You know, exorbitant phone fees. You have to pay for medical care. I think you even have to pay for food, I heard, on weekends. I don't know if that's true or not, but
maybe commissary, but I don't know if food, dining hall, if they make people pay.
And I believe oftentimes you have to, it's just be kind of tying in the issue of like the war on drugs and money in the correctional facilities. Or if you're on probation, I believe you have to pay for your own drug test oftentimes, and pay for like ankle bracelets if you're having to, which is.
You even have to pay for being booked in many states. You have to pay fees for legal aid lawyers.
Yeah.
Have to pay fees for DNA testing that you're subject to even when you're still not proven guilty. There are incredible numbers of ridiculous fees.
And how do people pay for them if they don't have the money?
They go on probation. And then if they can't pay things according to the probation service schedule, they get thrown back in jail.
Yep.
Which operates as a debtor's prison, even though that's supposed to be unconstitutional.
Wow.
And by the way, one other thing we didn't mention is that in this country, unlike many other democracies, when you go to prison, you get deprived of your political freedom. You lose the right to vote. It gets taken away from you. And of course, that's a disproportionate disenfranchisement of Black people, you know, who make up 1/3 of national prisoners, although it's only 1/8 of the population. And what gets also tied to that is you're not going to be serving on juries, because jury
you're
service,
not being tried by an actual fair cross-section of your peers, a community of your peers, if a disproportionate number of African Americans are ineligible for jury service.
Yeah, because they can't vote. And during Jim Crow, of course, when 100% of African Americans could not vote in the South, the juries were all white. But that's still going on. We have mass disenfranchisement because we're allowing the right to vote to be taken away from people when they're imprisoned, which other countries do not allow. Both of us should have been able to campaign in prisons, and the prisoners should be able to vote for us.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that those who don't want them to vote are not those who they're probably going to vote for.
Yeah, Mariah, have you felt in your time as commissioner you've come up against particular issues of the re-entry process, people that were incarcerated and now have re-entered society and face these problems where they can't vote, they can't serve on jury duty, it's really hard for them to find a job, the list goes on.
It's hard for them to find a job. It's hard. They're barred from getting into public housing. They can't get loans to go back to school. They're not eligible for all kinds of assistance, all kinds of support that would help them avoid recidivism or further contact with the legal system. And so, yeah, I've seen that time and again, people reach out to me, constituents or family members of constituents, trying to figure out how to, make ends meet because of the restrictions put in place upon reentry for folks. And so I think that, and then as I mentioned earlier, the issue of debt, leaving jail, having probably worked for the county for free because you want to be out of your cage for a couple hours a day, but you're essentially made a slave as a result. And for all of that work, you get nothing, and you come out and you have to pay off all these fines that Richard was talking about, all of these legal fees that you still have. And so it's very, very difficult to climb back out of that. And so I talk to people all the time who are facing those issues, and they deserve to be able to vote for folks that are going to make it so that their kids and their grandkids don't face those same problems. But they are, purposefully disenfranchised, and that's another issue that we have to fix. I definitely believe that folks should be able to vote from jail, and definitely as an intermediary step, ensure full enfranchisement for folks upon leaving prison or jail.
Mm-hmm. Especially somewhere like the South, where this is, coded in a history of racialized exclusion and segregation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, think of the barriers you face when you come out of prison. It's not just that you're going to have much harder time getting a job under current situations than before, but you're also getting out of prison with this big debt of all these fees and charges that have been incurred for your passage through the legal system. And the majority of prisoners leave prison with a debt hanging on them. And they didn't have the money in the first place. And now they're in worse situation on many, many scores. And what are they supposed to do? If we had a federal job guarantee, everyone coming out of prison would have a decent job awaiting them, paying them at least $20 an hour and doing things that would help our communities. But now they're in a situation where you can understand why there's such a high recidivism rate. I think it's like 70% within 5 years.
Yeah, so right, I guess we can open it back up to the audience. Anyone would like to jump in and ask a question? There's a lot left, undiscussed. So, does anyone have any questions? There's a lot of you in here. You should be asking questions if you have them.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Sean. I'm a former Athens resident. Recently, one of the things that got big press in Athens was, Mariah, you were in another counselor's 50-10 plan.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, as we're kind of talking about the connection between local government and federal government and the Senate, how do you, and you too, Richard, see kind of the reform of policing taking place from the federal government, from kind of a Senate position? Thanks.
Yeah, I can start with that one. So in addition to the bloated police budget that we pass with taxpayer dollars every year, we receive numerous grants from the federal government to expand things like our drug task forces, our police and schools, and other arms of the militarized police force. And so imagining a world where instead we were getting grants from the federal government for things like building community gardens or alternative kinds of public safety response, more mental health teams and other sorts of responders that are more specialized in dealing with the array of crises we face in our community, with better funding for our education system instead. And so looking at how the federal government spends its money in our community, I think is a really important piece to thinking about police reform locally and how that manifests locally, in addition to what we do on the local level with our local taxpayer dollars with regards to police funding.
I want to say something about that. I mean, one of the, I think one thing that underlies the call for defunding police is that it's raised in the context of municipal governance, where the resources that our cities and local governments have are extremely restricted. They have budgets that, as Mariah pointed out, are largely committed to so-called law enforcement. And there's very little left over. So it might appear that, okay, we're going to basically cannibalize on the law enforcement budgets as the way in which we're going to try to provide genuine security for people. And genuine security, of course, is not a matter of having a police force that is like an occupying army that is keeping the lid on a dysfunctional society. But it's a government that's the guardian of our freedoms, that's providing health care to all, that's providing decent housing to everyone, that's protecting people from eviction, foreclosure, that's protecting them from joblessness, protecting them from abuse at work or anywheres, and providing access to education and so forth and so on. And that, of course, requires public investments that go well beyond the resources of any locality. And I think we really have to act on a national stage to remedy these problems. I think also to make police accountable, it's very hard to do it on a local level. First of all, we all know about the blue wall of silence among the police themselves, where they're very reluctant to testify about their own misconduct. And although I trust Deborah Gonzalez if she were to be elected, nonetheless, local prosecutors work hand in glove with police. And they have shared interests in getting people prosecuted and convicted and the like. And I think you can't rely on local law enforcement and local prosecutors to police themselves. I think you really need to have federal investigations of any police killings. Of course, we need a different kind of Department of Justice than the one we have now. But I think you need to take things to a higher level. And of course, have complete transparency and obviously end all federal programs that involve militarization of police departments. Of course, on the other hand, I think we have to really deal seriously with the problem of the proliferation of guns. We really have to keep them out of the public sphere as much as possible, as well as prohibit, weapons that have high capacity magazines and the like. And that's an important aspect of both public safety and I think political freedom. We saw it in the demonstrations in Athens, where you had groups that basically are fascist groups coming to demonstrations, menacing everyone with combat weapons. That should not be permitted.
One thing about legal care for all that is so compelling to me, and how I've kind of been conceiving of it is it is kind of a step in an abolitionist history. Not necessarily like, oh, we're going to do prison abolition like from the jump, but when you start to think about legal care for all as something that is exposing what actually makes the criminal justice system as it is now work, which is profit motive, as opposed to anything else, and the disenfranchisement of poor people more than anything else, more than justice and more than rehabilitation, to level that and take that motivation out is starting to really reframe how we're thinking about justice and shift the prison complex as we see it now.
I got late, so I'm making lunch.
I think that we're going to wrap it up, so we maybe have time for.
So I am not going to do a Facebook Live with my face in front of the screen. I'm just going to let you see what I'm eating.
Hello?
I think they might have been unmuted on accident.
Yeah. We're unmuted on accident. Anyway, I think we have time for one more question because we do need to hop off at 3:30. So if anyone has anything else to add, we have probably time for one more. And thank you so much, Sean, for that question. It was poignant.
I have a question. Richard,
Yes,
where can we
sure.
contribute to your campaign?
Okay. The easiest way is to go to my campaign website, which is winfieldforsenate.com. I spell Winfield, W-I-N-F-I-E-L-D. And the 4 is spelled out F-O-R. And there'll be a donate button. And of course, I need volunteers. I'm not, as I'm sure you know, I'm not a darling of the establishment. I'm not one of the candidates that is awash with money or press attention. But there are 2 months to go, and I'm hoping to get a breakthrough and make it to the runoff in January and join Mariah in public office.
I can't wait.
Okay.
I'm going to drop the link in the chat for anyone that is interested. Yeah, again, winfield.com.
I'd like to also ask people to spread the word. I mean, that is a volunteer activity, actually. If you could inform 10 other people about Richard and send us their emails so that we can put them onto our email list, that would be extremely helpful, because I think what we have to rely upon right now in spreading the message is actually finding more and more people to spread the message to. And people who will take on the initiative of perhaps organizing other Zoom calls with their friends and etc. So please, each of you who's listening at least should send us 10 emails. You can do it on the website under volunteers, right, Lorna?
Yeah. To the website, you can go to the volunteer, and if you sign up as a volunteer, we'll send you a survey and you tapped in to work that you'd be excited about doing. Yeah. So I think if no one has anything else to add, we don't want to take up too much more of Mariah's time, who has to be somewhere. So I want to thank everyone for coming to this conversation, and please feel free to, like Ms. Sujata said, continue the conversation in your own networks, and feel free to reach out to us on our social media or on our website to ask questions about our platform, ask questions about the issues that Richard is running on, because this is a campaign about education and about the conversations that we kind of had today. And I want to thank again Mariah so much for joining us. I think this was a wonderful endorsement and a wonderful friend to have in this fight, and very much looking forward to continuing to talk with you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you all for coming, and let's win this thing.
And I want to thank everyone for coming, and in particular Mariah for lending her voice and energy to everything going on, and also to supporting me. So thanks.
It's my pleasure.
Cool. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.